We're going to start with a DFS look at today's MLB slate. Here to break it down is DraftKings contributor Matt Meiselman and RotoWire's Erik Halterman. All right, fellas, let's get your favorite pitcher over 8K tonight. So, Matt, it's a 15-game main slate, and there's two guys over 10K, Lance Lynn and Corbin Burns. So do you want to pay up for either of those guys, or are you looking to save some cash with someone else?
I don't really have an issue with those two guys. I think they're both good pitchers in good spots, probably both great pitchers. And actually, Lance Lynn is now the AL Cy Young favorite. But the problem is that there are some cheaper offenses that fit with these guys that I think will be really, really popular. So there's kind of this divide tonight where you have the Brewers, you have the Tigers, maybe the Pirates, who are the cheaper offenses. And I think if you're playing those teams, you use Burns or Lynn. But if you want to pay up for some of the more contrarian and maybe higher upside offenses, you need a cheaper pitcher. So the guy I like above 8K is Jameson Taillon, who hasn't had a great year. He's been just kind of okay. But if you look at his schedule, he's pitching in the AL East and he's pitching at Yankee Stadium. So it's a tough park for a pitcher to pitch in. And he's facing the Red Sox a lot. He's faced the Astros recently. He obviously has to face the Rays and the Blue Jays also throughout the year. So tonight he's going into Miami against a Marlins team that just traded Starling Marte, and Garrett Cooper's out. Corey Dickerson isn't playing for them anymore. So this is just not a good Marlins offense right now. And I think Taillon is probably a slightly above average pitcher that gets a bad rap because just the numbers don't look good with the schedule he's faced. So I think he's underpriced, and he's probably the guy that is sort of a pay up option. He's only a little bit over 8K, but I think he's my favorite overall pitcher on this slate.
All right, Erik, are you paying up for either of these guys, or like Matt, are you going a different route?
I would be happy to pay up for either of those guys. There's actually a lot of quite expensive pitchers on the slate who I like today. But my favorite over 8,000 is Patrick Sandoval at 8,800. Facing an A's team that's middle of the pack offensively. They're not an easy matchup, but not one we should be scared of, especially with a guy like Sandoval, who was 1 out away from a no-hitter his last time out against the Twins. He's a guy who people may not think of as a top tier starter yet because he was nowhere near that his last couple years. He wasn't terrible, at least in terms of his underlying numbers, but I believe he had ERAs north of 5 both seasons. This year he's down at 352 with peripherals that support that. Specifically, he's got a high ground ball rate, 53.1%, is 11th highest among pitchers who've thrown at least 70 innings. And among pitchers in the top 20, only one can match his 27.9% strikeout rate, and that's Lance McCullers. So that's the kind of company he's keeping, and he also is not issuing as many walks as McCullers. So he's basically been a McCullers with better control over the course of the year. And since the start of June, he's probably been even better. His strikeout rate's all the way up at 32.3% since over the last 2 months. So I think he's a guy who's really showing it all right now, and a guy I'm willing to trust with something close to frontline starter money, or at least second tier money.
All right, Erik, how about a big bat priced above 5K here?
Yeah, I'd be looking at a bunch of the expensive Blue Jays against Daniel Lynch for the Royals, who has a 7.88 ERA through 4 starts after a 5.84 ERA at the AAA level. Specifically, he just can't put major league hitters away so far. Strikeout rate under 15%. So I think George Springer the most out of the Blue Jays expensive bats at 5,200. When you get a guy who's leading off for a lineup this good, the Blue Jays are second by WRC plus over the course of the season, and that's even with Springer missing most of the year with oblique and quad issues. So he's got the prime lineup position. He's swinging a very hot bat over his last 11 games, hitting 341 with 4 homers and scoring 13 runs. So again, I'd be happy with most of the top Blue Jays at the top of that lineup, but I think Springer is probably the best value right now.
Matt, where are you going for a pricey bat over 5K?
I do think the Blue Jays are probably the best spot objectively as far as points per dollar. Daniel Lynch had 8 shutout innings in his last start, but he did it with only 4 strikeouts, not a lot of swing and misses, and he did it in a home start against the Tigers. Obviously, the Blue Jays are a lot better than the Detroit Tigers are. I just think the Blue Jays will be the chalk pay-up option. I don't think there will be a lot of expensive bats that are popular on the slate, but I do think the one team that people will gravitate towards when they pay up is Toronto. And it's for all the reasons that Erik mentioned. And also the Blue Jays are big favorites on the money line. They're over minus 200. The total for the game's 10.5. I just think it might be a little too obvious where a lot of people play them. So I'm looking again to pay up a little more to get a little more contrarian. And Shohei Ohtani, I think, again, will be kind of low owned for this slate just because of how much he costs. And Chris Bassett's not a bad pitcher. He's probably above average. But Ohtani is just that good. And anytime you can get him 5% owned or less, maybe he comes in closer to 10% owned for tournaments. But I'm just excited to play Ohtani when other people aren't in any situation. And Bassett is not great. He's fine. And I think Ohtani could still have a big game against him. So he's usually not my guy because most nights people do play a lot of Shohei Ohtani, but I think tonight's one of the rare exceptions where they don't.
All right, Matt, let's switch gears here and talk about the DK Sportsbook. So what's your favorite MLB bet tonight?
Yeah, I'm not really going against Patrick Sandoval. Like Erik said, he's been really good, and I don't expect him to pitch poorly by any means, but his strikeout prop is a lot higher than what I think it should be. Yeah, that's probably the best way I can say it. It's just he's had an easy schedule, so I think that's what's inflated the number. And I'm also a little concerned that he just had a near no-hitter in Minnesota, where sometimes guys just don't look as good the start or two after the no-hitter because they were pushed a little deeper in the game than what they normally are expected to do. Sandoval has 22 strikeouts over his last two starts, but those starts were against a Twins team that just traded Nelson Cruz and the Mariners, and he's faced really just an easy schedule along the lines of that for most of the season, where his last handful of games was Twins, Mariners, Orioles, Rays, Tigers, Diamondbacks, Mariners. It's been a while since he faced a well above average offense, and the A's just did pick up Marte, who doesn't really strike out much at all, and he's a right-hander going against Sandoval, who's left-handed. So I just don't think this is a matchup where he gets a lot of Ks. I do think he could pitch well. I agree he's a good pitcher. I think that him getting 7 strikeouts shouldn't be the expectation, and it's more likely than not that he gets 6 or less.
All right, Erik, what about you? What's your favorite MLB bet tonight?
I'm liking the Mariners at -130 over the Rangers. We're entering that part of the year where teams that have reason to care are facing teams that have given up a long time ago, and it seems like the Mariners do still care. I mean, we saw those news stories about how angry their clubhouse was after they dealt Kendall Graveman. It's quite clear that the team is still playing for something, even though they're more or less on the fringe of the playoff race, and their playoff odds are even lower given, the talent that team is projected to have. But you compare that to a Rangers team who's, known they were out of it basically since day one. The Mariners don't have a great offense this year. They're 22nd by WRC plus, but the Rangers are 28th. And since the start of July, they're last in the entire league. So it doesn't take much to be clear favorites against the Rangers. When you throw in the 2 pitchers, I really like Logan Gilbert for the Mariners. 3.81 ERA. His FIP is almost a full run below that. Combines a high 28.8% strikeout rate with a low 5.6% ground walk rate. Doesn't keep the ball on the ground that well, but in pitcher-friendly parks like this one, that shouldn't matter too much. He wasn't great against the A's his last time out, but in his 2 starts before then, struck out 17, walked just 2, allowed just 5 hits and 2 runs. So I think he's very much somebody that I would trust, even though he's a rookie. On the other hand, Colby Allard seems fine, but nothing special at all. 4.71 ERA, slightly below average strikeout rate, doesn't walk a ton of guys, but nothing really special there, and he's allowed 12 runs over his last 2 starts. So I think pretty decent sized gap in the pitching and the lineup, and the motivation means that -130 I think is too low for the Mariners here.
Now let's talk about the MLB trade deadline. So Erik, what's your favorite deal so far? And is there a deal that hasn't happened yet that'll be completed by the 4 p.m. deadline?
Yeah, as far as favorite deals, I think you just have to look at that Dodgers blockbuster getting Scherzer and Turner. I mean, I'm not here figuring out, which deal is the most precise surplus value over the next 10 years, because I don't really care about whether or not the owners have a tiny bit more in their ridiculous hordes of gold than they have now. I think I'm just looking at who's the better team, and the Dodgers have done as much as a team really possibly can to improve their team. They have the best starter available at the deadline and probably the best hitter who's going to get traded too in one deal. And they gave up real pieces. The Nationals didn't get fleeced. Nationals gave up 2 years of team control combined over on 2 stars, and they're getting something like 25 years of team control over players with some high potential. Keibert Ruiz could be their starting catcher for a long time. Josiah Gray is definitely a real starting pitcher. But in that NL West, where it's so competitive, You really want to win the division. If you win the division, you've literally doubled your World Series odds because you don't have to go to a coin flip wildcard game. So I think there's huge motivation for all the NL West teams to make a big deal, and the Dodgers made the biggest possible one. I think it's that simple. As far as deals that haven't happened yet, I think the Cubs probably rule the day. If you want a rental bat, Chris Bryant and Javi Baez, those are two of the biggest ones who could move today. If you want a reliever, Craig Kimbrell is probably the best one who's going to get moved at the deadline. Cubs have been plenty busy already, but I think they control, I think, how everything goes the rest of today.
Matt, favorite deal so far, deal that hasn't happened yet, you think will be completed by 4 p.m.?
It's the same deal for me too. That's been my favorite so far, is that Dodgers trade. Like Erik said, they blocked the Giants and the Padres from acquiring Scherzer. They almost literally stole Scherzer from the Padres, who were very close to trading for him themselves. And then the Dodgers ended up with Scherzer and then also Trey Turner. Not only are the Dodgers now positioned to win the division, even though the Giants are still a few games ahead, they're very likely going to face one of these teams in the playoffs. If the Giants don't win the NL West, then the team that they face in the wild card will be another NL West team, because all three of these teams are very likely to be in the playoff hunt. Only one can win the division, so the other two would be the wild card. So if the Dodgers do win the division, they probably get put over the top because of Scherzer and Turner. If they don't, then they're playing a wild card game against a team they just stole the players from. And then if they do advance further in the playoffs, they could very well see the Padres at that point, or the Giants. So this is a huge deal, not just because of the players, but because of where they could have gone had the Dodgers not made a move. And then as far as other trades, I mean, the Padres and Giants must be a little desperate now after the Scherzer and Turner deal went down. There aren't that many players left, though, and the Yankees and Mets are still in the mix to acquire a bunch of these guys. So we have Jose Barrios, who is scheduled to start today. I think, unlike Max Scherzer, he probably won't make that start. The Nationals had incentive to prove Scherzer was healthy, like we talked about yesterday, but Barrios, I think there's no concern with that. They probably just hold him out while they try to make a deal. And then if he doesn't get traded, he'll just return to the team after the deadline. And then we have Trevor Story and then the Cubs guys, like Erik mentioned. So I think probably someone there goes to San Francisco or San Diego, but the Yankees and Mets haven't done, well, the Mets haven't really done much of anything yet. The Yankees have made some moves with Anthony Rizzo and Joey Gallo, but they still have assets to make more moves. Maybe they land Trevor Story. So it'll be interesting to see. I feel like even though a lot has already happened, there's still a lot that could happen from this point forward.